Welcome to Wrestling Chat with Friends, the Tuesday show. I'm EJ the Collector. I'm joined as always by Double G Jeff Jarrett. How you doing tonight, TG?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks. Hey to everyone out there. Thanks for the privilege of your time tonight. Hope you listen to us this Tuesday and every Tuesday on Wrestling Chat with Friends on Apple, on Spotify. We're also on a Thursday show as well on Apple and Spotify, as well as our Facebook page, Wrestling Chat with Friends. Join it, share it. Our Twitter feed at WCWF Pod. Share that, retweet that, like that. And on YouTube, we have a YouTube channel where we're going live right now on Wrestling Chat with Friends. Join our page and tell a friend. Let's get some breaking news out of the way since it's Tuesday and we're a couple days away from the next WWE Premium Live Event Elimination Chamber. Breaking news that I guess happened today. You broke it to me, TG. Jerry Jarrett passed away today. He was around 80. He was one of the patriarchs of this kind of Southern wrestling promotion territories. He's the father of Jeff Jarrett, current executive for AEW and Hall of Famer in WWE. I don't know how deep you go in wrestling, or especially Deep South wrestling. When I say Jerry Jarrett, his legacy, does anything come to mind?
Ooh, great question. The first thing that popped in my head was that when Vince was on trial back in 91 or 92, whatever that was, the rumor was that the contingency plan, if he were to go to jail, was to have Jerry Jarrett come in and run WWE.
Did not know that.
What's funny about that is that was always kind of the conventional wisdom. And then later, like, that has been refuted, but I don't know if it's one of those things that has gotten refuted as part of WWE's sort of notorious revisionism, meaning, the sort of after the trial was over, it was like, oh, we never had a doubt that Vince was going to win, and there was never a contingency plan because we knew we would never. And it's like, I kind of feel like it's believable they had a contingency plan because they're not stupid.
Sure.
But yeah, he was supposed to be the guy who was going to come in and run WWE if Vince was going to be out of the picture. So
that's really interesting. I think of Jerry Jarrett, like in my growing up, I didn't know a whole lot about the Deep South territory until I got like a stack of wrestling magazines from like 79 to 81. I probably got that in about 86 when I was like getting into wrestling. I was able to learn my history from reading those magazines. Old PWIs, the wrestlers from like I learned about the Bachwinkles, the Gagnes, the Jerry Jarrett. And then as Jeff Jarrett became part of my consciousness, I kind of knew his dad. His story and really seeing and hearing a lot from him came for me from that Tales from the Territories documentary that has been filmed over the last 2 years. That's on Vice. And there was an episode about the territory this year. In this past season, he was on, his son Jeff was on. I don't remember who else was on. But anyway, learned about him. He was one of those guys, there's not a whole lot left that didn't do anything else in life when they started at age, whatever they were, 19, becoming wrestlers, promoters, bookers, owners of territories, and then became, on the talk show, on the podcast circuit. He didn't do podcasts, but he made appearances for probably the last 12 years of his life, but it was still probably quasi running some wrestling shows somewhere in the South. One of those lifers like your Bachwinkles, your Gagnes, that's a fan. Those are not going to be around much longer, especially after the McMahons.
Yeah, and I think that when you think about guys from that era, they really were. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche and probably an oversimplification to tag them with the carny label, but I do think that they were important transitional pieces to take wrestling from the true sort of carnival days of the earlier part of the 20th century into the television era that we know. And those guys like Jerry Jarrett or Vern Gagne, for example, are really guys who did have sort of one foot on each side of that line. And so for that reason, I think they're interesting figures and by the way, I think that part of that sort of heritage where they came from was also part of the reason why they weren't able to. So many of them really struggled to survive against the national onslaught of WWF at the time, because Vince, for whatever his flaws are, he sort of had that vision and understood, like, thinking 3 steps ahead of what wrestling needed to evolve into to thrive on a national level. And they were evolutionary and he was revolutionary, and they just fell by the wayside as a result. But yeah, Jerry Jarrett definitely, huge influence on modern wrestling and an important figure from its history.
Okay, well, you really gave the perfect segue for segment 2 tonight. So actually, I have set up for us, because it's Valentine's Day, who is your wrestling Valentine? So if you have one loaded, give it to me. If not, we're going to skip it, because I want to piggyback on what you just said. Talk about one of our main topics tonight.
I mean, I assume it's Greg the Hammer. He's the only one I know of.
Johnny Valentine. Johnny Valentine died in the plane crash that Ric Flair was in. I guess he was related to Greg Valentine. Do you have it? Do you have another? That was a quasi question to who's your ultimate wrestling crush.
Well, what I was going to answer was
Greg the Hammer. Greg the Hammer is the right answer. I mean, it is.
The rugged good looks of Greg the Hammer Valentine. When I was a kid and I wasn't really into wrestling, quick tangent on Greg the Hammer Valentine, I was aware of wrestling, but I didn't watch it. And this was Greg the Hammer, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong here. But he was the one who had the kayfabe injury to his leg, and then he would turn around the shin protector and then put his opponent in the figure four.
That was Greg Valentine. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I always was fascinated by that shin protector, because if I remember correctly, it had a painted drawing or painting or airbrush or whatever of like a leg bone. And I don't know. Okay. There was something about that's like seared into my childhood memory from that. To answer your question, 3-way tie among Massey, Mansois, and Otis. The maximum male models.
That's a great Valentine.
If you're asking me sincerely who the most attractive wrestling,
who's your ultimate Valentine?
I mean, all time it's got to be Tori Wilson. Tori Wilson was just
Mine's Lita, for probably a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah, you're a big fan of Lita. I've noticed that's a recurring.
Huge fan of Lita, and kind of modern day for me, it's Alexa Bliss. Alexa Bliss, and and Liv Morgan. Both of those, and that's not really my number one type that I go to. It is a bit more of a Lita, that's sort of dark, striking features. But yeah, anyway, before the show gets too creepy, happy Valentine's Day.
Way too late for that. Please continue.
If you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. Okay, so you were talking about guys like Jerry Jarrett, Gagne, Bockwinkel being those transitional from in the heritage of what pro wrestling is, and what Vince has made it become and what it is today. So Paul Heyman talked about it this week, and we've been talking about it for weeks. Think about the Emmy Awards right now. There are categories for everything. Shows like, reality competitions get nominated and win. Game shows, I guess, probably get nominated and win. Professional wrestling is episodic television that's been going kind of nonstop since 1993, 2 shows for over 20 years. The WWE markets itself purely as entertainment. So there's been one Emmy won for wrestling. Do you know what it is?
Wow, that's a great question. I would guess it's something in the. I mean, certainly not for a performer. I would guess it's something either in the production realm or music related.
What era do you think that might have been?
It's got to be more recent. I can't imagine. I mean, I could be wrong. If it's something old, like pre-1980s, I would be shocked. But I mean,
wrestling.
I don't know it.
Wrestling has only received 1 Emmy. It received the very first Sports Emmy.
Oh, interesting.
And it won, at the time, a very small television station, KTLA in Los Angeles, won an Emmy for their sports coverage of wrestling.
That was Gorgeous George was there then.
I guess that, yeah, probably 1950.
Yeah.
So only Emmy won. We've watched, decades of characters and storylines and the same kind of entertainment you see on part daytime soap opera, part TV, part reality show, part athletic competition, all stuff that in other veins win Emmys. What we're seeing out of the Bloodline last year could clearly, in our opinions, would be Emmy worthy. Paul Heyman has mentioned that someone like Roman Reigns is like semi in character, should be Emmy worthy. Is the origin and heritage of wrestling coming from the circus and carnival get in the way of something like that? Why is it not even considered for stuff like that? That's my question.
I think it's twofold, and it's coming from sort of both directions. On the one hand, I think there is still likely some lingering snobbery about pro wrestling and its origins, and so I think that that's one of the things that prevents it or has prevented it from being considered in that way. But I think the other thing, honestly, is historically coming from the wrestling side, where it's like there's still, I mean, now it's all out the window, but I think even if you go back to, like, let's say the 90s, when wrestling, the late 90s, when wrestling was probably as popular on a week to week basis as it ever was, or the 80s, when it probably peaked in sort of mainstream overall popularity. In both of those eras, I think even if someone from, the Academy of Television Arts had floated this idea to someone in, say, WWE, they would have been hesitant because it would have essentially confessed to the choreographed nature of wrestling. Now, today, 90% of wrestling fans, probably maybe 95% of wrestling fans over the age of 12, are aware of that it's a show. And so I think that aspect of it, there wouldn't be as much resistance today. And the thing that, for me, that I think is kind of the dumbest thing, and you referenced it a minute ago, is that whatever you think about, let's say wrestling was not choreographed. Let's say it was real. The production values, especially on the WWE side, that go into that television program are as good as any kind of sports program that you will see on television.
Yeah, as much as we talk about we're talking sort of primarily about the performance we've seen on television with the writing and the creative. But forget that. The lights, the sound, those production are most definitely have been overlooked, I think.
Think about how complicated the direction and real-time editing of a WWE program is over a 3-hour Raw, and they do it every week, like second nature. It's really, really impressive. So my point being that even if the performance stuff is kind of let's deal with that question separately, but just from a kind of production standpoint, it's weird to me that WWE is not, and maybe AEW at some point, but WWE is not more, I guess, a topic of conversation when it comes to honoring it for different kinds of technical Emmys. Now, the Heyman point, which is one that I've made before when it comes to Sami Zayn on this show, I'm like, whatever you think about wrestling, within the context of what this show is, and quite frankly, the degree of, so this is one of my other points, the degree of difficulty, I'm not suggesting that, like, say, Sami Zayn or Roman Reigns, that they are as good of a traditional pure actor as someone like a Bryan Cranston, for example. But that's not the point. This is a live TV show where they also have to perform physically in ways that are far beyond anything that like actors have to do. But for the most part, I'm sure there's an exception or two here and there but in television, not really. So my point is, like, there needs to be some way to honor what they are doing within that medium of television. And the fact that there's not, I do think, goes back to the snobbery around the art form. And then also historically, I think there was sort of probably hesitancy on the part of promoters to be categorized. Well, I'll give you a concrete example. When Andy Kaufman first pitched the idea of getting involved with wrestling to Vince McMahon Sr., and because he obviously was, New York origins, and he was like, I would love to do something. And his hesitancy and his ultimate refusal not to do it, McMahon that is, was, if we bring in a television actor to do what we do, people will connect those dots and say, oh, they're all just actors. This is all just a show.
Yeah.
So that was why
that time that was forbidden.
Yeah, that was why he turned it down. And I think that mentality is one of the reasons why it seems silly to some to have that as part of an Emmy consideration.
Sure, it's not intuitive to see. Nominees are Keenan Thompson, Roman Reigns, right? Although essentially they're out there performing live every week.
Yeah.
Roman's doing it for twice as long and traveling. And but anyway, not saying he's any more deserving. However, so we've been talking about this Emmy award-winning storyline and performance. The main highlights on both SmackDown and Raw since the last time we got together on Tuesday had been these confrontations. Sammy on Friday Night SmackDown was meeting up with Jay behind the trucks. He wasn't supposed to be there. Is that when Paul Heyman saw him, or was that from somewhere? That was some time else.
There were two different segments. One was Jay and Jimmy talking. That's Paul Heyman watching from behind the column.
Right.
And then at the end, Paul Heyman, he didn't directly see, Jay and Sammy next to the truck bumping fists and all that conversation. But at the very end of SmackDown, he tells Jimmy, the tribal chief has an assignment for you, like next week, Friday, just watch from home, because sometimes you see things on TV that you don't see live in the arena. What's so fascinating about this is, again, as creative as the storyline has been, they have now done something that you never see done on wrestling television, which is acknowledging the unstated fact that there are cameras that are showing you things backstage that, in theory, if it were a traditional television show, the audience shouldn't really be, you know what I'm getting at. You shouldn't really be seeing this part.
Who was it? Was it Jericho's theme? Break the walls down. The fourth wall, all the walls.
Yeah. So the fact that they've sort of have explicitly addressed this common conceit in wrestling television is really interesting. And I think also what it leads to story-wise is the implication that the tribal chief sees all. He knows what's going on here. He knows, Jimmy, that you lied to Paul, just like Sami Zayn lied to you guys a while back about talking to Kevin Owens. So there's a parallel there. And then, more importantly, the fist bump with Jay and Sammy, and like, what does that mean for Elimination Chamber? And as we apparently, as Dave Meltzer reported, that the visa issues have been resolved. So if you want the Usos to come to Elimination Chamber, and I don't think we'll know for sure until Friday night, depending on what happens Friday night. But if they want them to be there in person, they can. So we'll see.
They got me so excited on Friday that there was a moment when Sammy and Jay were talking by the trucks. Whatever gesture caused the camera to shift left, and I paused it and reversed it. I thought I saw a pair of feet under the truck, and I was looking to see was that Paul's suit pants, and it was just like a dolly that was back there. They totally worked me, but yeah, they've got people whipped up into a frenzy like that. It's so good. And then on Monday, Sami Zayn's been this sort of hooded figure that has bum rushed the ring, and let's talk about how great it was that they let Baron Corbin get 3 words in before he got cut off.
Fantastic. And especially the part where Kathy Kelly says, very specific choice of words, something important is happening.
It's so good. Right. we could do a whole episode on the evolution of Baron Corbin. Like, he's being used. He's kind of almost starting to fill that character that's in that Dolph Ziggler character that's going to be here for a long time, can be trusted, is real pro, loved by everybody.
That's the thing.
Doesn't always get a heel, but doesn't generate enough heel heat, or it's sort of like go away heel heat, but he'll be there for years.
The funny thing about him is that everything you hear, even though he admittedly has trouble, I think, connecting with the audience in terms of like getting over, everything you hear is extremely hard worker, loved by the locker room. And so I think just from that, he will be around for a long, long time, just because, like you said, reliable, good hand in the ring, high effort type guy, which makes sense as a guy who comes from, pro football background. I think there's a correlation there. But yeah, the way they're using him now, I thought what they did Monday was absolutely great. I'm glad that he got to bring up the fact that he is the last guy to pin Roman Reigns, which
they hadn't brought that up in a long time.
I'll guarantee you that a lot of people at home who did, because we talked about that on the show, but a lot of people at home were like, that kid, he's lying. That's not true. And they looked it up and were like, wow, that is true. That is true.
Yeah, there was something with what I'm trying to think of what else I was seeing the night where it seems as though maybe now that like Triple H is back in charge for a bunch of months, it's getting a lot of momentum sort of because of the Bloodline storyline. I wonder if in some way Triple H is sort of doing some segments and reminding some maybe lapsed fans who have returned to the product, give them sort of a reset. Something struck me that I said, really, they're sort of explaining this like we didn't really know. Like we as the fans know some of this, but maybe they're bringing some of it back. Maybe I think it was maybe the Edge stuff when Edge talked about, it's been a whole year.
Oh,
I mean, you think about, so maybe it could be just strategically trying to get some fans who haven't been maybe checked away for the product for 6 months to a year. It is WrestleMania season. Some of these lap fans might be starting to tune in. Yeah. So it's sort of like catching them up on like, here's what we've done since you've been gone, just in subtle ways. And you can do that in wrestling. So Baron Corbin, God bless him. So he gets interrupted because Sammy has bum rushed the ring in his t-shirt. The crowd was really hot in Brooklyn on Monday. Our friend Victor Perry was there with the wrestling club. They rolled like 22 or 23 deep. He brought like the entire class to WrestleMania. Shout out to Victor. And kind of caught me off guard. He called out Cody Rhodes and the crowd went nuts. And Cody came out to a great response. And he came out because Sammy wanted to ask Cody a question. But within 2 minutes, Sammy's yelling at Cody saying, "You ask me what I think?" He's turned it around. It got goosebumps there for a minute. I'm going to let you talk about it. What do you think of it? How great was it when the two biggest names in wrestling, not named Roman Reigns, are finally facing each other? I thought it was magic.
It is a very, very the most interesting thing to me about that segment is the decision to have those two guys get in the ring with each other. Because you don't have to do it. One's on Raw, one's on SmackDown.
Yep.
I think logically, you're like, look, we can get through whatever's going to happen with Sammy and Roman on Saturday. And then if Sammy's still in the picture, then we can pivot to all three guys or some combination of them in the road to WrestleMania. So this was something they didn't have to do. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that the effort put into this segment really stood out. And I mean the creative effort, because the premise of the segment was incredibly flimsy. It was like, look, we just know, like, they started from, we want to get these two guys together. And whatever we need to do to get there, it's like, that's fine. It doesn't really matter. The point is getting them both in the ring.
Yep.
So the premise is like, Sami Zayn, want to ask you if you really believe I can beat. It's like, that's neither here nor there. But I think I was really impressed with Sami's intensity. I think it's been important for him to show that side. I don't want to call it rehabilitate his character, because his character is obviously red hot, but his character has gotten red hot as sort of this really clever and comedic foil for the Bloodline, that kind of stuff. Like before Sami Zayn, the Bloodline was, kind of badasses, very serious, dominant. Like Roman at times, when he was going on his run to ascend to this mountaintop, he was like kind of like a scary bully type character. Yep. And then it's gradually transitioned to something else. And so to get Sami to a point where he seems like a credible opponent, which still, I mean, truthfully, I'm not even sure Cody's a credible opponent at this point, because Roman Reigns is so far above everyone else by design. I do think Cody has a chance to win, to be clear, but it's just tough for like a guy to come back, even as a Rumble winner, and just come back, beat Seth Rollins 3 in a row, laid out due to a injury, and then come back and win the Rumble. And that's like the first time we've, really seen him back. But the other thing about that segment was
Now, first of all, you've been a
Yeah.
critic of Cody Rhodes's promos, so
And
I'm getting ready to
well,
hear. I'm getting ready to hear something. I think.
yeah. So this is what is intriguing to me about this. I thought Cody, I thought it was fine. Like it served the purpose of the story. It was good. I think it was a bigger deal for Sami Zayn to be in that segment than Cody. What was intriguing to me is on paper, at least in my brain,
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff that Cody did in that segment was it was right on the border between sort of white meat babyface, which that's what he is right now anyway, and pretentious heel. Because he sort of slides into this territory of like, I, your peer, am going to give you a pep talk, which to me is like condescending. So this is my point. If
Okay.
he were
I'm with you.
really, if that character were really sort of a pure like baby face, I'm an athlete who's going for a championship. The logical reaction to Sami Zayn is like, look, man, I hope you beat him because I like you and I think you deserve it. But ultimately, I don't care if it's you or Roman at WrestleMania. What this is about is me winning a championship. So if it's you, great. I'm happy for you, but I'm going to beat you. If it's not you, okay, I'll beat Roman. That's kind of the more pure sort of character. And that's kind of not what we got here. This was more of a, like, again, like I'm your dad talking to you, like hyping you up for the big game. And that to me is like, that seems like a very Cody idea to me.
The whole moment too with it does
I'm so critical of the guy, and he's obviously great, but I
that
just
that whole moment, the pep talk. Sammy's really become the feature player going into this weekend.
yeah
Not going into WrestleMania yet, but going into this weekend for sure. It almost feels like it's going to be a little bit of a deflating feeling if what ends up happening is KO returns Saturday, KO and Sammy end up facing the Usos at WrestleMania, which is seemingly, if we're going to get Cody and Roman, that's the other option, is to have those two.
yeah.
Building up Sammy so much. I thought also on Friday, when didn't Heyman sort of open the show that night with both titles around his on his shoulder?
On Friday, got interrupted by Sammy.
And it sounded like this was almost a setup to start talking about a title split, because he said, Roman has these two issues on SmackDown that, he has Sami Zayn. On Raw, he was more like identifying that these are two separate things, maybe. So I thought maybe that's where they were going to go. But it seems unlikely that this close to everything, it's going to be a undisputed title match on Saturday and an undisputed title match on WrestleMania, unless you don't let Adam Pearce make that decision, right?
I think is he the manager? I'm not.
He said Monday he was the manager of Raw and SmackDown, both shows.
I gotta say, I've very quickly come around on Chelsea Green's character. We can talk about that.
You and I are completely opposite on that.
I know. I like it a lot. Couple other things about Sami Zayn right now that I think are good signs if you are a Sami Zayn fan.
Go, yeah.
One is the reason for obviously there's a storyline reason for it, but I think it's kind of the between the lines reason that he is appearing the way he's appearing, like coming in on unexpected with the hood up, etc., is because they want to save his big entrance for Saturday.
Sure.
So they're not going to, because since he has turned on Roman, he has not had a proper entrance, and I don't think you'll see it until Saturday. So they're building that anticipation, and I think that's for the better and for the better for him. The other thing to go back to the Cody segment, again, I think it is the fact that they chose to do something that really was optional at most to put Sammy in that mix, I think is also a really good sign if you're one of those people who wants to see him, have a shot at at least one of the titles WrestleMania weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that the most likely scenario is still what you just talked about, which is the tag team stuff. And I say that because the fact that we haven't seen Owens at all since Royal Rumble, to me, is highly suggestive that, you will see him again for the first time on Saturday, and he will play some role in that match. And I think, well, we can talk more about that when we preview the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view. But I think it was a good segment for Sammy.
We can kind of start previewing it. If you want to talk about this match, let me start the main event first.
Sure. I think this is the way. I will say, I'll preface this by saying the Bloodline storyline has continued to surprise, certainly me, I would say us, most people.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about the way it has surprised me, anyway, is that it's really interesting because historically in wrestling, you have swerves where it's like, oh, I thought they were going to do A, but instead they did B. And sometimes it's really cool, and sometimes it's like, that doesn't really make sense. They just, like, latter day WCW swerves for the sake of swerves, which are bad. The Bloodline storyline, again, one of the things that kind of sets it above most wrestling storylines is that a lot of the unexpected stuff that they do is in the form of, well, it looks like the story is pointing towards A, and then they do A, but then they do something else that you weren't anticipating that moves the story ahead. And so what I think is going to happen, and what I think that is kind of pointing in the direction of, is ultimately Jay is going to come back into the fold, and he's going to do that by reluctantly and sort of begrudgingly turning on Sammy. You will tell he's conflicted, but he will do it ultimately, which of course then casts the Usos clearly as heels. That sets up Sammy and Kevin versus the Usos at WrestleMania if that's the way you want to go. And then, of course, that clears the field for Roman and Cody. But I will say one final thought on the Raw promo that I think was really good for both Sammy and Cody. So the good thing about this, like, if you're, again, we've talked about this a little bit before, but if you're WWE, you're watching that segment and you're like, we've got a problem, but it's a great problem to have. And the problem is they get through that whole segment, and it is so abundantly clear that even like a pretty smart wrestling crowd like Brooklyn completely respects Cody and loves Sammy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that raises this question that I'll guarantee you has not been completely resolved, which is, are we ever going to have this kind of opportunity again with Sammy? This is a red hot, the hottest thing in wrestling. If we completely blow it off at Elimination Chamber, vis-a-vis Roman, that is, are we passing up something that really would be special?
I don't know who you think you're talking as, because Vince and Triple H have sort of expressed as such that he's not the main event guy that we as fans think he is.
Yeah, but I think you go back to WrestleMania 30, where they reluctantly and ultimately correctly put Bryan in the position that he was in. The difference now is, as we've said in the past, that was such a clear-cut choice where they had brought Batista back to the company, and it was just, he was getting booed because people didn't want that. Now you've got the thing where it's like, the scenario is, it's WrestleMania 30, not exactly analogous, but somewhat. It's WrestleMania 30, but what if Batista was way over?
Right.
Then what do you do? How do you resolve that? I don't know the answer to that. And I think WWE, they still obviously, I think, are fully committed to Cody. But the question is Sammy hot enough now that they're going to factor him into plans? And if you think it's a hard call now, wait until he comes out Saturday night. And then it's like, even people who are probably like skeptical are going to be like, crap.
Yeah.
Like this is the guy. What do we do?
It must be. I mean, I'm hoping it's sort of taking a bit of a two-headed approach, because of the pop Sammy's going to get. I think you're right that the Usos will turn. They're counting on the other Canadian guy, Kevin Owens, at the very end to come save that all and make the decision for them. They're going to get so much heat, with Jay. They're building Jay up like he's conflicted, but when, like you said, he does turn, really turns up the heat. They hit that Kevin Owens' music, they bring the crowd back again to Sammy and Kevin and put them on a path to face the Usos. I think you're probably right. Take that, Emmy voters. What else is out there? People are catching airlines and eating snake heads on the Great Race or whatever, on the Amazing Race. This is just as good. It's really fantastic. We're
Eating snake heads. What's happening?
they're all, the Amazing Race. They do all sorts of stuff that gets nominated. Jeopardy duly gets nominated and wins. But Saturday Night Live, those guys get a lot. They're the most Emmy won show, and the WWE's like the Ginger Riders. They're doing everything Saturday Night Live's doing, but backwards and on in wrestling boots. So anyway, let's move on to sort of like our preview. The other big singles match, I guess, on Saturday is going to be Brock and Lashley for the third time. I was not a fan of this contract signing yesterday. Man, now I'm going to say something hot take coming in. Lashley started that promo off when he came from the back, but set his table up at the top of the ramp. Like, I thought he was slurring his words for a few moments there. He seemed like he had zero energy. He's made a full heel turn, but I thought he came out looking like a chump. I thought Brock, you and I disagree on this, Brock's doing the best work of his career, in my opinion. He's speaking more than he ever has before. He's kissing babies. He's shaking hands. It's a Brock we've never seen. I kind of dig it. After many, many years of this beast, it's cool to see this out of him, in my opinion. And because he has decent mic skills, I thought he made Lashley look bad on Monday, look scared. The crowd was definitely into it with Lashley scared. I don't have a lot of excitement going to this. I think I know what's going to happen because of some other, behind the scenes, backstage stuff they're setting up. But how do you see this going down?
This is a confusing one for me in two respects. The first is that they have really – it's been odd how they have framed Bobby Lashley's heel-face alignment. He has gotten himself over as a face and is like – he is a super over face character in that company.
Been a few years now.
Yeah, he's done a really, really good job of that. But the confusing part is, number one, like all of a sudden he's a full-on heel, and they've had weeks where they've like kind of gone back and forth. Like it looks like, oh, he's making a heel turn. Like this goes all the way back to Crown Jewel, where Brock beat him, and then he like kind of freaked out after the match, and it was like, and all of us thought like, oh, it's a heel turn. But then he was slapping five and doing face stuff,
right?
In the weeks after that.
Right.
So that part is confusing to me a little bit. But what's more confusing to me is the timetable here. Why are they doing this at Elimination Chamber when it obviously seems like a WrestleMania match? What is going on vis-a-vis the Hurt Business? Like, to me, the way to go is, okay, number one, you build towards a big match at WrestleMania. Number two, the Lashley heel turn should coincide with a reunited Hurt Business. And then it makes sense. Then the story going back to, MVP telling Lashley like he needs his support, and Lashley saying, no way, I don't want your support, and then he loses. Like all that stuff suddenly makes sense. Having him preemptively turn heel and then having this match now, I don't know. I'm just not sure what comes next. Like I'm just not sure. Like, do they just have another match in a month later or month and a half, whatever it is?
Will be Brock in a handicap match against Lashley and Benjamin. That I don't want to see that either.
I would hate that.
Right.
Bobby Lashley and Brock Lesnar should be portrayed as peers, and he should not be in a handicap match with Lashley and someone else. That I don't like.
They typically you do a blow off on the third match. Elimination Chamber is that third match.
I don't get it.
Even a cage match, or was a pit match. They're gonna bring back that Riddle Rollins gimmick. They're doing that for WrestleMania for
remember Riddle? Remember that guy?
Riddle. Riddle and Miro
was a guy.
Riddle and Miro are just somewhere on an island, just sitting together. Right, long wrestlers. Speaking of cluttered or clouded WrestleMania plans now, Bianca Banks won a triple threat match against Becky and Bayley.
Bianca Belair, that's a Freudian slip.
What'd I say?
Bianca Banks.
Wow. Bianca Belair. I sure did. Bianca Belair won a triple threat match against Bayley and Becky
Mhm.
Lynch. I'm getting named now. I'm questioning if I'm getting names right. So, who knows? I don't want to talk about Bayley for a second. Bianca is awaiting the winner of the Elimination Chamber match. Becky doesn't seem like she's going to be in this match on Saturday. Do they run Becky and Bayley back again at WrestleMania, or something else in plan? And how do you foresee that going?
I think last time we talked a little bit about the fact that it seemed like the appearance of your girl Lita
Mm.
was leading towards the possibility of a 3-on-3 with Becky, Lita, and Trish against Damage Control. And I think at the time, I kind of floated that just speculative without looking anything up in the group chat. And then I looked it up, and it was like people were saying like, yes, it's gonna funnel into that. But the idea was that also was going to be Elimination Chamber since it's in Canada and since you have Trish in the mix. I'm thinking maybe, unless she suddenly shows up on SmackDown Friday and they do it with, one day of promotion, I think that maybe that's your WrestleMania match, which I think at least would be interesting because you bring back a couple of Hall of Famers, you have, some high profile stuff. It elevates, probably most importantly, it elevates Damage Control, who quite frankly have languished, even though they've been the tag team champions for all this
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one option. I do think bottom line, you're going to see Becky and Bayley on opposite sides of some kind of match at WrestleMania. I'm fine with that. I liked, and this is what I think Triple H brings to the table in terms of his booking style week to week. So that match, the main event from Monday, is a great example of something. Story wise, it makes sense. It adds a bit of intrigue that you want to watch it because, like, oh, this could affect not only Saturday but also WrestleMania, and they're not afraid to resolve it in a way that is realistic but also doesn't up the ante, which I think is the temptation. It's like, oh, we want to throw another person, another high profile name in this match. So I liked the execution of it. I liked the outcome of it, and it still again leaves sort of an unencumbered path for Becky and Bayley to, in some way, shape, or form, match up again at WrestleMania. So
I love
it
it.
was weird hearing Bayley talk about like her history at WrestleMania because I was like, oh yeah, you've done a lot of stuff that I've completely forgotten about because
Yeah,
you were a completely different character then, and I've sort of don't even remember it.
for sure. For sure. Yeah, no doubt about it. All right. So let's touch on one more thing till we get your Elimination Chamber match predictions. They have been kept apart for months now. They've been in completely different shows and storylines. On Saturday, Rhea Ripley and Finn Balor are going up against the returning couple, Edge and Beth Phoenix. Dom will, of course, be at ringside. Is this when they're gonna drop the hammer and bring it back on Saturday, leading to WrestleMania with a returning or a rescuing Rey Mysterio coming out to help Edge and Beth Phoenix at some point from an attack by the Judgment Day, led by Dominic, to get this started for WrestleMania, Dom versus Rey.
By the way, speaking of over, I don't know that there is anybody, maybe Roman Reigns now, post
Mm-hmm.
Sami Zayn. I don't know if there's anybody in WWE who is more of a heat magnet right now than Dom Mysterio. Like
I never thought I'd hear you say that or anyone say that.
even when they're doing backstage stuff, and it's like, okay, we're going to talk to Finn Balor for a second, talk to Damian Priest for a second, and then they pan to Dominic. You can
Mm-hmm.
hear the backstage. You can hear the crowd just
Yeah.
start screaming with disapproval. It's fantastic. Anyway, this is an interesting match to me because I think this is one where, on the one hand, where the story suggests this should go is pointing in one direction, and where you need to get to for WrestleMania is pointing in the other direction. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, from the WrestleMania standpoint, Rhea Ripley, you need her to go over. She won the Women's Rumble. She's going to challenge Charlotte for the title. It seems pretty obvious that you're not going to have a part timer come in and beat her, even if it's in a mixed tag and isn't the one who takes the pin. But story wise, you've built this up where the dastardly Judgment Day stooped to the level of like assaulting Beth to make Edge say I quit, and assaulting her in a very sort of, by TV PG standards, pretty graphic and sort of brutal way.
The
So you would
concerto,
think,
yeah.
yeah. So you would think in Canada, Edge is going to get his comeuppance, and he and
Mm-hmm.
Beth are going to get their revenge, and they're going to win the match.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the best call from a WrestleMania standpoint. I think. I don't think you want to sacrifice the momentum that Rhea has for the sake of that. So, but I will say Ray definitely gets involved. Dom and Ray will for sure wrestle at WrestleMania.
Something about Ray coming out
Yeah,
and threatening Dom that will
even in the odds, because Priest and
well,
Dom will be there.
what I see will happening will Ray it will cause Rhea to be completely distracted, and the loss and the win by Edge will come via Finn. She'll be nowhere in the ring. She won't be anywhere near. She won't have been the action. That will be a big swerve when Ray comes out, and only then I think when she's completely focusing on her Dami will Edge spear Finn, do what needs to be done. I do think Edge goes over in Canada and they win, but in a way to, like you said, keep Rhea like not even in, as if you'll forget she was even in the match, because for your reason, she needs to look as strong as possible going up against Charlotte.
The scenario you just described, I think, would be the smartest way to book it, and I hope they do it that way. And I think the way it works is like, Beth Phoenix obviously she's big and powerful and is a Hall of Famer and was a dominant champion in her day. I think you have, like, when Rhea's in there with Beth, I think even though Rhea's the heel, I think you have her get the better of Beth to sort of show the level that Rhea's on, and then ultimately Edge gets the pin.
Yep. Okay, so there are two Elimination Chamber matches. I personally like Hell in a Cell matches more than Elimination Chamber. I do like some of the moments when the pods, someone gets speared through a pod or breaks out of the pod. There's always the best. Those and the leaps from the top of the pods. But the concept itself is sort of just weird. I don't need that aerial shot of like, the pressure luck wheel goes around and finally stops. But anyway, all right. So the winner of the Women's Elimination Chamber goes on to face Bianca Belair at WrestleMania. We got the legs of Natalya, Nikki Cross, Raquel Rodriguez, Carmella, Liv Morgan. Who comes out of there to face? I left one out, and that's who probably the favorite is. Who do you see coming out of that to face Bianca at WrestleMania?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Asuka. I think that she has now clearly established herself as a heel, number one. Number two, even though she's kind of a cool, interesting heel. Number two, Triple H, well established, is a big fan of hers, and rightfully so. I mean, I really, really like her. So it gives you a heel matchup with Bianca Belair. It's somebody that Bianca hasn't wrestled in a while. I mean, has wrestled her before, and certainly hasn't wrestled her in this version of herself. And so I think that is the fairly obvious choice at this point.
Liv took the pin on Monday night in the Raw SmackDown 6 women tag team match. Does that have any significance that she took the pin, or do you see this? This is a scenario, WrestleMania in a championship match, where I could see a Liv and Bianca and Asuka triple threat. Liv's pretty, one of the top female wrestlers right now. She's very over with the fans. Mm-hmm. It's not quite the Daniel Bryan, not nearly the Daniel Bryan and Sami Zayn momentum, but like if you needed to switch something up to put because of some fan reaction, depending on Saturday, I could see that with her, but no one else. And I don't even think that's going to happen. I think Asuka's going to take it too. So
yeah, I think that Liv certainly is very popular, but I think unlike when she had won Money in the Bank, or like the lead up to Money in the Bank, and there seemed to be just a groundswell of really wanting to see her win a championship. I think that now that that's happened, I think it makes more sense for the repackaged Asuka to kind of be because the other thing is.
So you saying Asuka is going to take the title off Bianca at WrestleMania? Because I can see
that I don't know.
I could see Asuka being someone who could lose. Where if you had it being Liv, I think you'd want to crown Liv in her redemption story. Asuka is someone that they could do a few months go to SummerSlam.
I would not be surprised if Asuka won.
Yeah, me too.
But I think this goes to the point of Bianca has been a very, pretty dominant champion and has beaten. I mean, everybody at the top of the women's roster that at least on Raw that she's faced, including, Becky Lynch, who previously was, of course, the dominant champion. So I think that you have, in order to have somebody who has credibility as a challenger, you either have to have somebody who has a really, really strong story, which is like that's the Sami Zayn example, or you have to have somebody who something either they're a new competitor or they've had a repackage or a refresh on their gimmick, and that's Asuka. So I think Asuka wins the Elimination Chamber, and I think in the month and a half leading up to WrestleMania, there's going to be a lot of video packages that they're going to do reminding people of how dominant Asuka was. Because remember, I mean, she won when she moved up from NXT. She had never lost. Like she
Right.
just surrendered the title and was
Right.
undefeated still for a long time. So I think her first loss was it Charlotte at WrestleMania, the first time she ever lost in WWE. It might have been.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, it does sound about right. Charlotte,
It sounds exactly right.
Um,
Yeah, so I mean, I'll go right from where you're ending your prediction and say she wins Elimination Chamber, she wins WrestleMania. There's some roster shakeup. Bianca goes to SmackDown and starts a feud with the new champion Rhea Ripley.
Oh, interesting.
So Rhea chose Charlotte to kind of complete her Grand Slam journey, to run it back with her. Part of the argument with Bianca was the history they had in NXT together. So I think that's how they solved that.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Men's Royal Rumble, the U.S. title has been
Elimination Chamber.
God, the Elimination Chamber match on the men's side is going to be for the U.S. title. U.S. title for a good long while now, especially when Bobby Lashley held it, was really ascended to a very, very important title. I'm not saying it's not anymore because Austin Theory has been holding it, and he's done really well but he hasn't been featured too much, and the crowd's so enamored with Seth Rollins that the U.S. title has become almost secondary a little bit. But the winner of this Elimination Chamber on the men's side, well, Austin Theory's in it, so the U.S. title's on the line. You got the likes of Seth Rollins, Johnny Gargano. Help me fill it in here. Who else you got?
Priest, Montez Ford, Bronson Reed.
There you go. Right. So this is gonna be a great, if you want to see a lot of big spots, heavy hitters, guys slapping against each other. That's what you're going to see. How do you see this playing out?
I think a couple things. I think you'll see a good showing for Bronson Reed. He'll probably get an elimination or at least throw somebody around the ring. I think also Montez Ford is going to be made to look really good. He might even have the most eliminations. I think I said that last week before the field was fully.
We had high hopes for him in the Royal Rumble. It didn't work out so well.
That was also strange to me. I think this is what I've decided about Street Profits. I think that they are just going to have them kind of tread water until after WrestleMania, and then I think they're going to start a big program around the two of them, whether it is, depending on what happens with the tag titles, whether it's a tag team push or a tag team breakup. Mm-hmm. And then, I will say Dawkins has really raised his game in the last few months. And so whereas it used to be like, oh, well, clearly Montez Ford, and I still think Montez Ford is the better of the two, but as in terms of singles potential. But whereas it was like clear cut, now it's like Dawkins could, he could also be like go have a productive singles career. Mm-hmm. And like you said, maybe they do a WWE draft and they get split up. Who knows? There are a million different things you do. But I think in this case, I think you're going to see Montez Ford is going to have a good showing. Bronson Reed will have some dominant, like crazy spot, throw somebody through a pod or something, or, jump off the top of a pod and squish Johnny Gargano, something like that. So they'll have memorable moments. I think that Damian Priest is going to be in line for a nice push. I don't think it starts here though, because I think this entire match is for two things. One is, I think, and it's all WrestleMania related. So I think Austin Theory retains. And then I don't know if it's at the show or maybe it's the following Raw. But I do think we're going to see John Cena at some point. I think there's been too much sort of groundwork laid by Theory. And this is what separates this from the situation with The Rock. With The Rock, it was like they were pretty deliberate about not really referencing him or talking about him on TV. I think because they knew like this is a long shot. You don't want to talk. I mean, the classic Vince McMahon sort of rule, and maybe beyond Vince, it's like you don't want to hype up a potential match on TV if you don't think it's going to happen. That's like a cardinal rule of promotion. So I do think you're going to see Austin Theory retain and something happen with Cena, whether it's that night or Monday or whenever. And then the other thing is, I don't know if Logan Paul is going to be at this show, but very clearly they are pushing that direction. But
Seth. You don't see that. You don't see the Logan Paul Seth Rollins match being a chance for Logan to capture his first championship at WrestleMania.
That's interesting. I hadn't really considered that. I guess you could do it the other way, which is to say Rollins wins the title here, and then that's a title match, and then you have, you know, a PO'd Austin Theory getting, you know, run down by Cena, who's like, you're a crybaby, whatever it is, and then they just have a match. I think it's more likely that it's the other way around, just because I think that again, they've already done so much sort of telegraphing of this being Paul and Rollins, and I think that behind the scenes they think of, and I think correctly, think of Rollins as a star who is big enough that he doesn't need to have a title to be a major attraction. And I think that was certainly the case when he was feuding with Cody. And so I think here, especially with, you know, Logan Paul being on the other side of the equation, I think that's going to be the case. Whereas Austin Theory without a title going up against John Cena, I think is probably going to be perceived as, again, not kayfabe one-sided, but or I should say kayfabe one-sided, not one-sided in real life, where it's like obviously Cena's the part-time guy. So I think that's where it winds up. I still think Austin Theory retains, but we'll see.
See, hey, let me say one more thing to Emmy voters and people again. TV shows that win Emmys all the time have these after television, after the shows. Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen, The Talking Dead. Wrestling has podcasts that the way you and I just spent the last hour breaking down these storylines, addressing them, the pros and cons. So, you know, Emmy people, that's really been the subject of tonight's show, is Emmy people get on board and start thinking about this. Hey, man, this has been great insight. Are there any other big matches that we're forgetting? Is Gunther performing on Saturday?
I mean, we haven't talked about what we think is going to – well, I guess we kind of have talked about indirectly what we think is going to happen with Roman and Sami. I think –
Yeah, we covered that beginning.
Yeah, Roman wins with help from Jay, and then we go from there. I don't know what they're going to do with Bobby and Brock, though. I don't – like, it would be weird if that's like the end of the feud and then just like WrestleMania, it's just question marks. I don't see that. But, there's only again, something I said about WrestleMania. It's great that there's a women's Royal Rumble. It's great that there's a women's Elimination Chamber. But when you put two chamber matches or especially two Rumbles on the same card, it really constricts how many matches you can have on the card. So Gunther is not getting a match on Saturday, but he is getting a title match Friday night against Madcap Moss.
All right. I'll go with it, and maybe we'll remember Bray Wyatt. Remember when he used to do stuff?
I got one thing to say about that.
Okay, this is your. I was going to ask you if you had a final thought, wrestling or non-wrestling related, but I'm making it wrestling related. Give me your Bray Wyatt thought.
So this is my final thought. Okay. It's not a good sign creatively.
Oh, stop it!
When you hold on, let me finish. It's not even going to be about Bray Wyatt directly. It's not a great sign creatively when you have in less than a year the same guy, meaning LA Knight, have two separate backstage promos, the theme of which is, hey, you know all that stuff I've been doing for the last few months? Let's just forget about that and move on. Not going to talk about that anymore. That's not great. And, you know, no fault of LA Knight. I mean, I think he's been doing great. But the fact that Bray Wyatt has not been on TV for a little bit, a couple of weeks, I guess, or a couple of shows anyway.
He's got a broken finger. Hold on. He's got a broken finger.
Does that affect his abilities? He doesn't wrestle on TV, so I think he probably can, you know, cut a promo with the broken finger. I think they're just pausing him until after the Chamber, and then they'll have something that's a continuation of this Uncle Howdy confusing story. And now Alexa Bliss is taking time off, so it's like, how does that affect all this? I don't know.
You could put Nikki Cross right into that position right there. You would hardly notice. Whatever happens,
I'd rather have Liv in that position, but yeah.
Oh yeah, sure, me too. Whatever happens, we're going to talk about it next Tuesday. So you got SmackDown, you got Elimination Chamber on Saturday. There's going to be a post-Elimination Chamber press conference. There's no NXT, and then you got Brawl on Monday, and we'll be back here on Wrestling Chat with Friends, the Tuesday show, talking about it. TG, thanks for tonight. I appreciate it. For Cheats in the booth, thank you again to all of our fans. Thank you for the privilege of your time. We really do appreciate it. Follow us on our socials, Wrestling Chat with Friends on YouTube, on Facebook, both groups, join and share, and definitely on Twitter. Engage with us at WCWF Pod. We'll hopefully be here on Thursday to talk AEW with Cheats. So until then, thanks so much, guys. Y'all take